Reverend Kyle Jones, same question, and feel free, I think all of you, please give your own words of opening statement, but the question still on the table is the greatest impediment facing African American candidates seeking congressional and statewide offices.
Well, first of all, let me say, as I received the email from President Somerville of the people who are going to be on the panel, and I started to read the names, I kept trying to figure out how I got on here. And then I received a text message about 12:08, which stated that she wouldn't be here, that she had family obligations. So I realized I'm probably pinch hitting for her. But as Dr. Abrams would know, in Arkadelphia, we take care of our own. So I'm glad to be here and thankful for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you all. I think everyone has really addressed, especially Mr. Moody, that it is all of the above, the problems that we face. But I also think when we look on the national level at President Obama's campaign, the first time it was about hope and change, those inspirational words that we all cling to. But the second time he ran as a Democrat. The second time he talked about economic justice. The second time when it came down to the nuts and bolts, he talked about what really matters. And I personally believe that in Arkansas, our messaging has to be a messaging that appeals to Arkansans. We have to talk about things that matter, such as poverty, or 18.4% of Arkansans are below the poverty line, 750,000 on Medicaid. Those things work. Those things combine and allow people to see somewhat past race. Racism is something that we'll always be dealing with. But when you talk about the economic issues that affect the people of the state, then I believe that message gets through. If we think back about Bill Halter, a name that we remember, that we know, even the idea of his idea to even try to run against Blanche Lincoln was something he did to the left of Blanche Lincoln. I think, especially in my area, in Clark County, sometimes we have a difficulty running as Democrats. Our candidate for representative talked about keeping big government shut down, or keeping our tax rates low. That's not really an appealing message for African Americans or for the populist sentiment that I still think is in this state. So I think if we change the messaging, make sure that we're not afraid to run as Democrats, just like the president showed us. Talk about economic justice. Talk about improving our communities. I know we all had the hope and idea that we would be able to see great things like a rebirth of the Great Society or the New Deal. And those things still appeal to us because we know that we need government help in many instances to change our communities. So I think that our biggest issue is just our messaging to make sure that we run as Democrats and not a watered down version of Republicans.
All right.
Last up, Dr. Jay Box.
Great. Thank you all so much for letting me be here today. To answer the question, I'll try not to repeat too much of what's been said. I do think it's the grand combination of geography, demography, and racism that is the answer to the question of why the obstacles to African American success in this state. I mean, we know that the relatively small percentage of African Americans in this state is an obstacle, right, in terms of statewide success. And the geographic concentration of African Americans is a real obstacle in this state to this county and, of course, the counties of the Delta. And that means that most white voters in Arkansas really don't live around many African Americans in their daily lives. And then when asked to vote for African American candidates, I think kind of freak out a little bit. And we certainly saw over the last two cycles, when asked for the first time to vote for an African American candidate for president, we certainly saw rural whites from the southwest corner of the state to the northeast corner of the state really move away from the party. And when you look at the maps that Chairman Bond showed earlier, that shift, if you looked at 04 versus 08 versus 12, the places in the state where you had the biggest shifts were those counties from in southwest corner of the state and those parts of the northeast corner. And I think that clearly that those white voters who interact with African Americans very little in their daily lives, I think clearly were not ready for that experience, and that was undeniable. I think that, and I think that it was complicated. I think it is superficial to call it only racism, because I think it was more complicated than that. I think that Barack Obama, as a guy who is incredibly urbane, who has really never lived in a rural area, probably fully doesn't get their life experience of being a rural Arkansan. I think being a rural Arkansan is something that Barack Obama has never experienced. And I think that in return, I think a lot of rural white voters really were unable to connect with him on a variety of grounds. The perception about his religion, we know misperception, but the perception that those white voters, I think, were so willing to take on, and the fact that he was disconnected. I want to just close. I mean, you said it's the best of times and the worst of times. It's also the most uncertain of times in Arkansas. And the 2014 election is going to be the cycle where we decide if we move in the direction of being an Alabama, or if we move in the direction of being a state where there is a stable, ongoing two-party system where the folks in this room and the Democratic Party has a place at the table. And to go to Gary's point, I think it is person power in 2014 that is going to decide the outcome of state elections in Arkansas. And we have not been a state which has traditionally had active, effective grassroots organizing. This is a real opportunity. We've got to make what happen in those neighborhood operations in Ohio and New Hampshire and all those other states come home to Arkansas if we're going to win. And the people in this room obviously are the heart and center of that.
Thank you, Dr. Barr. You know, it's oftentimes you sit next to a professor and you probably peek at the professor's notes. I'm thinking the professor's maybe looking at my notes, because next up is how do we move forward in uncertain times. And so that's ironic that we're at this juncture. We're in the now phase 2 of this panel discussion, which will take us about 15 minutes. And I want to allow each panelist 3 minutes now to focus on an array of questions that I'll pose to each of you individually. But with the backdrop of some of our dark times, as you've heard from each of our panelists, the question now posed to you is how do we move forward, which is the main backdrop of today's discussion. How do you encourage or line out details for our audience on how we begin to think different, how we begin to frame a new approach for the Democratic Party as it relates to opportunities of recruitment and training for candidates of the future? How do we begin to end some of our own internal conflicts amongst our own people? New opportunities for inclusions with Hispanics or others across the state, i.e. Northwest Arkansas, which I think has done a great job. How do we, as a party, move forward, looking forward to 2014? And we'll start with Dr. Abrams.
One of the things you deal with in any process is what is the structure. The Arkansas Democratic Party decided about 4 years ago that we were going to superficially, I think we found out, address diversity. And we established 12 auxiliary caucuses, and that within itself, I think, has divided us. How would you say that, Ms. Abrams? When you have our meetings as we had today, and you have the women, the African American, the Stonewall, the senior Democrats, the young Democrats, and when you divided us out, and some of us fit in all of those categories. I'm old, black woman, and a veteran's wife. It divided us instead of helping us to be more unified. One of the things that I found was that when we did that, we quit being concerned about get out the vote. Get out the vote is important. We also got sidestepped by saying, okay, we're going to take money and we're going to get out the vote. You can't do that. Voter education is the long-range solution to our problem. We do not have that. That's the reason why I have been insisting that the Black Caucus, if no other, we've got to educate people to get people to the vote to the ballot, and they don't know the issues. And we haven't researched to know what their real basic needs are. This is an agrarian state. This is one of those times when we were industrial. That evolution has gone. The paradigm now is the technological. So we are not prepared, and many of the people we got to depend on will never be able to hear what we are talking about because they do not have technology. We'll have to get the one thing, I'm glad you're here as a Delta. We're trying to get where everybody can even have a computer, have the emails and all those kinds of things. But we immediately got on, if you didn't get an email, that's out. Too bad. And the majority of our state is an agrarian state that had an awful shift in the paradigm from agrarian to industrial to now technological global environment.
Great. Next up, Representative Love. How do we move forward? Your suggestions.
How do we move forward? Well, I'm going to speak from the perspective of the Legislative Black Caucus, and so that's the perspective I'm going to give you. Number one, here's the thing. Ms. Abrams did touch on the technology piece and moving us forward, and we added that as a Legislative Black Caucus to our agenda because we know that was one important thing. But as the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, here's what I feel like your legislators' role should be. I feel that we have to bring everybody together, and I'm just stressing our community. I'm not discussing the Democratic Party right now. I'm talking about our community.
The African American.
The African American community. How many of you all know your state legislator? Let me see. See, that's too few. And then how many of you have a personal relationship with your state legislator? With the state legislature? See, that's too few. And so what I'm saying is this, is in order for us to have an effective agenda, we have to hear from everybody. We have to start at the state level because I hear a lot of people say, well, the Legislative Black Caucus ought to provide leadership. Well, the Legislative Black Caucus and I'm just talking from my years, I can't go back in history. But the thing about it is we don't have that line of communication open with our local elected officials. And then that pours down to our grassroots people, our communities. How can we have an effective agenda for ourselves when we're disenfranchised ourselves? And so as the leader of the Legislative Black Caucus, this is what I want to bring, more of a inclusive agenda, because if I'm not addressing your need, where's the reciprocity? The reciprocity might be like, well, I don't know Fred Love, and I'm not going to vote for him because he hasn't given me a reason to vote. And so, therefore, I feel like as a legislator, it is my job to engage people at the local level. And once we begin to build that, we will begin to have an agenda that is cohesive. And then I believe we can address the issue of why we have poor voter turnout in African American communities. To me, we really haven't given you a reason to come out and vote. That's not an easy thing to say, but that's the truthful thing to say. I mean, we're all involved. But what about that person that's going to work from 8 to 5 that has kids that maybe working a second job just to make the ends meet? And so therefore, but I say that that's my job. But it's also your job to also get involved with your elected official. Call us. You know, my phone rings all the time about issues, and it may be it's probably not issues that I can address. You know, I get some street calls, and they're local issues. But you know what? I should have a relationship with my local official that I can call him and say, hey, you know what? This is an issue that I've heard from a constituent, and so therefore I want you to address it.